Opening up our Peacock and Williamson mailbag today, we talked earlier in the week about the top 10 teams in the league, ranking them in our power rankings. But what about those teams that won't make the playoffs this year? When can we expect some of those teams to make the jump into the tournament in future years? Davante Adams and the Raiders. An interesting statistic there are the Raiders earning more of our attention now to end the 2022 season. And what about Coach Hot Seats? All that and more coming up on today's Peacock and Williamson.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look into the NFL on the field and in the front office. With elite breakdowns, next-level analysis, and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Thanks for making us your first listen every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is what we do as a network as a whole. So make sure you're checking out everything else going on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. And of course, whenever we reference a line, we are referencing those BetOnline betting lines for the NFL season. Listener James asked a good question here. He said, can you do a quick rundown of how many years away you think the current non-playoff teams are from making the playoffs? And I think some of these teams we think might be close next year, some multi-year propositions. As we know, you look at the history of, say, the Detroit Lions, they've got one playoff win,
right?
Never. You know
yeah.
So it could be rough for some of these franchises that might be just starting a rebuild too. So let's go down here and look at some of these teams.
I say, where are we going to cut this off? Like, I'm sitting here looking at the standings. Are we going to go like Patriots and lower?
I'd say below the Patriots.
Okay. How about anyone that has a losing record?
Yes. Yeah. Let's do that.
I mean, it's going to be a long conversation. So, I'm looking at the AFC North because everyone in the East has a 500 or better record. I think you could picture the Browns as a playoff team next year. What people don't all understand at this point, though, is because of the way the Watson suspension intentionally was laid down, they're going to have some serious cap problems next year. So they'll probably lose more than they add. But if they have Watson leading the show of 2 years ago, I think they are definitely in the playoff hunt. I'm biased, of course, so please be honest with me. I think the Steelers could go to the playoffs next year if Pickett continues to progress. They lose very little in free agency. They have 3 early picks, like $50 million in cap space. I think they'll have a better roster around the young quarterback next year than this year, and they took some lumps and grew, especially offensively.
Yeah, they took their lumps this year with a young quarterback. If he makes the strides that you would expect and hope that he would make in year 2, the defense is playoff ready. He's got receivers to throw to. Can you maybe help out the offensive line a little bit, have enough resources to do so? And you just have to hope that development is there for your young quarterback. And he's got all the pieces around him to make that happen. So I would say of these teams, it's very likely that the Steelers are in it. They just have a lot of tough competition in their division.
Yeah. I mean, I think they'll end up 8-9 this year, and with a lot of momentum and a good offseason, I think they could be 9 or 10 wins next year. Who knows,
Yep.
Colts, I can't say yes. Just because of the quarterback situation. I mean, if that gets fixed, and I'm not trying to shortchange the question, but the way they're currently designed at the quarterback position, they have to make some substantial move. But that division's very winnable. If they go and put Jimmy on that offense, I would say they could be a playoff team next year.
Yeah, if let's say they go Band-Aid approach once again at quarterback, and it works for them this time, and say Jimmy Garoppolo, let's put that name out there, someone who's probably going to be available. And if you have a defense and a run game, he's proven he can take your team to the playoffs. So do they have everything else? Who's going to be the head coach? There's still enough questions there. If they go the young quarterback route, which maybe they need to, even if they go veteran quarterback also, do you get worse before you get better? So with the Colts, it's Colts, and even with Matt Ryan that you thought was going to be that Band-Aid guy this year, it still hasn't worked out. So I would pause on the Colts just because there's not enough information on what
they're hard
look like next year. But I would say in the next couple of years, they should be able to. but they might turn it to a longer term build, and then it's a lot murkier.
Yeah, I mean, if they have a Pickett like first round pick and he kind of has a rough rookie year, we might be talking about them a year from now as, if they get better, they could be a playoff team. If they Jimmy it, they could be a playoff team, I think the Jags could be a playoff team.
They need to be.
Yeah.
And they're going to be drafting high again.
Yeah.
And
division helps.
I think we've seen some signs, seeing and Trevor Lawrence is banged up now, but he had a really nice game the week before. If he puts a couple more out there, I'd feel a lot more confident saying, okay, 2023 is the year. And it looked like early this year that this could be the year for them. They're stacking a lot of talent on that football team. So early next season, we'll be able to know that this is going to be another, this is not the group, new coach, new whatever. Probably not a new quarterback, but who knows? You never know how these things are going to go. There's still a lot of questions there. I'd put them in a similar boat as the Colts, but I'd rather be running the Colts or the Jaguars and the Colts.
I was about to say the same thing, just because of Lawrence.
Just because you think you have a quarterback figured out.
I think they have a coach too.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm not sure Indy is. Indy does not have either at the moment. They may have one. It may in the future. Houston, to me, is the same as always. I mean, this offseason, I think we'll talk about, boy, it'll be a good year if Houston gets to 5 wins.
Houston's still a couple years away.
Yeah, they're a year away from
being another one-and-done coach. They still haven't figured out their quarterback. They were checking out Davis Mills. They don't like that, clearly. They've gone the Allen route now at quarterback, and who knows, maybe they'll switch back again. But it still feels like a couple years away, at least for the Houston Texans, and that's if things go well.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't see it. What are we building off of there that we can count on is going to improve next year? I just don't know.
And even from this year's rookie class, did they build that foundation yet, even to build on top of?
Right. Like, sure, I'm sure Stingley's going to be a good corner, but does that take you to the playoffs?
Yeah. So
I don't see it.
Years.
Do these two AFC teams take a break, come back to the NFC?
Yeah. Let's do that. AFC West, the Las Vegas Raiders at 5-7. They're making themselves a little bit more relevant. They look like the disaster of the league just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, and they've won 3 in a row. I just put a stat up on Twitter that they're averaging a lot of 7 yards per play over the last month or so. They're just feeding Adams and Jacobs, and it's working really, really well. This sounds foolish, though, because the Raiders were a playoff team last year. I just kind of talked up the Steelers and Browns at 5-7. But is this roster going to be better next year than last year? You know what I mean? Like, I still see O-line problems. I still see defensive problems. I mean, sure, they could be a playoff team, but I don't know that they could be a contender.
I've got another note about those Raiders and another listener question about the Raiders. So we'll get to that next. Let's finish up this AFC portion with the Denver Broncos, who took over from the early season power rankings of biggest disaster in the league. I think right now the Denver Broncos lead that with a 3-win season, with a new head coach, with a quarterback, and more questions than answers.
I think it's easy to say they're the most bleak team we've talked about besides Houston. And I still agree with that. Like, I wouldn't be thrilled to take that head coaching job, considering how tied you are to what looks like a bad, old, expensive quarterback.
Oh, I'd rather have the Texans job than the Broncos job right now, just based on resources and what you have to build on.
First-round picks.
Broncos have more stuff right now, but Texans have high picks and stuff to work with. With the Broncos, it might have to get worse before it gets better.
It might. I lean that way, but I could also write a story where some established head coach comes in, not necessarily Sean Payton, but somebody that's been around the block that'll put Russell in his place and say, we're handing the ball to Javonte Williams 20 times a game, dude. And you know what I mean? And the defense is in place and they win 9 games in a wild card team.
And I could see a coach there might be a coach out there that's scratching his head looking at this team thinking, oh, what are you doing? Like, I could go fix this team in 10 minutes.
Like, it might be a quicker fix than it looks, but it doesn't mean you're a Super Bowl team, or ever going to be happy about the Wilson trade.
But if you go that route and it's not a quick fix, then now you're a year behind what you should have started this offseason.
Yeah, but 1 year from now, you might have the 3rd pick in the draft and take the kid from North Carolina or USC, and
There you go. Yeah. Better. Maybe this is not the class you want to force yourself into a quarterback. Maybe the next year's class will be better. And it's looking like it might be that way. And it's really funny, Matt. that conversation. We've got to take a quick break here, but remember last offseason, it was like, oh, next year's quarterback class, just wait for that one. We might see that again. This is a better quarterback class than last year's. There's going to be quarterbacks drafted higher,
of course,
than where I want to say Cody Pickett, where
Kenny
Pickett. Shout out to the former Washington Husky Cody Pickett. But it might be the year after that might be even a better quarterback class.
It makes me crazy because every year everyone says next year's class is unbelievable. Yeah. Just wait, or boy, Matt Leinert's going to be so much better when he goes back. And some of these things.
Patrick Mahomes was a second round guy.
Right.
Mac Jones was a second round guy in November, December of the seasons right before their drafts, and you see these guys just kind of fly up the boards. So you just never really know.
Of course, but it does look like next year's class will be better than this upcoming class and the last class. I mean, I would bet on that.
I would think so as well. Higher end players that teams might be fighting.
No brainers. Yeah.
There might be some high picks, but maybe not that, bunch of trades and everyone fighting up to get, certain guys. Mm-hmm. Okay. Next, those teams that look like they're out of the playoff picture in the NFC, when will they be in the playoff picture next? Turo is the world's largest car sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want, wherever you want it, from a community of local hosts. For example, this weekend, I'm going up to Lake Tahoe. It's been rainy over here in the Bay Area, which means it's been snowy up in the Sierras. I'm going skiing, but I do not own a 4x4, so I'm going to go to Turo, find a local host that has a car that is a 4x4 that can get me through potential snowy roads, that can get me up to Lake Tahoe a little, safer, I would say, and probably a lot quicker as well. You can browse a huge selection of vehicles from just about any occasion you want. You're going into the mountains, you're taking the family on a trip, SUV, minivan, 4x4, you can do it. We're talking United States, UK, Canada, and now Australia as well. You can find Turo vehicles. Get a classic or luxury car for a special event, or maybe you just need to get from point A to point B on a budget. How about driving that new electric vehicle you've had your eye on? See if it fits your everyday life. Many Turo hosts can even deliver the car right to you. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions apply. Forget your boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com. Thanks again, everybody, for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen today. For your second listen today, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. NFC, let's start with those Detroit Lions. We brought them up a little bit earlier, and they're a team that looked like, man, okay, you thought they might be a lot better this year. They looked really bad to begin the year. Won a couple of games. Their defense has gotten better from being the worst in the league, but still they're not a playoff caliber team. Can you see that happening for the Detroit Lions at 5-7 right now? Can you see that happening for them next year, Matt?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it'll be a heavy defensive offseason for them. They still have a fair amount of resources to do that. They're not going to pick in the top 5 or whatever anymore, but you can dedicate themselves to quarterback and defense, and maybe even just say, we'll live with Goff for a year and be a playoff type team. Maybe we don't have quite as high a ceiling.
But I think they're going to pick in the top 5. It's just not going to be their pick.
Oh, that's true too. I'm
with that Rams selection.
Yep.
Which helps escalate things, right?
It does. I mean, so maybe that's CJ Stroud, and then you draft a corner, or maybe it's 2 defensive players, and so I could absolutely see them even winning the division next year.
And if you're the Lions, you're probably looking at the Chicago Bears and Justin Fields, and maybe a little bit more worried about that going forward than Rodgers and Kirk Cousins. Or
maybe
or you're just not even worried about them. You're worried about yourself.
I think you're worried about yourself. How do we build this thing the best way possible? Green Bay could be scary. I guess we could go right to Green Bay. I mean, if Rodgers is dialed in and the defense comes together, I think we're crazy to say Green Bay can't be a playoff team next year.
They should have been a playoff team this year. I don't know what's going on. Like, I think maybe you make a change to defensive coordinator, if anything. Yes. The young receivers, especially Christian Watson, looks like he's a guy, whether it's Love or Aaron Rodgers next year. I would think that they should believe that they are a playoff team, and I would probably project them to be a playoff team next year. They just got to play like they should be playing. Like, they are underachieving big time after winning 13 games every year for 3 straight years.
Yeah, 100%. And you can't just say Rodgers doesn't have any weapons. I mean, they got some dudes. I mean, I absolutely could see them back in the mix next year. I don't think I can say the same for the Bears.
The Bears need a lot of work. They're, as far as roster goes, they're right there with the Texans, with how much work needs to be done. It's funny because their defense is kind of falling apart with a lot of injuries right now, and they traded away two really good defenders, so they still need a lot of defensive players as well. They have 100 million cap space. They have draft picks to get some of this done, although they traded away their second round pick. But
they're going to
gotta help.
That, yeah.
Can you do everything they need to do in one off season? Doesn't feel like it, because they need impact players, impact positions, edge rushers, wide receivers, offensive linemen. So that can take some doing, and it can take some time, but you've got to start building around your quarterback as well. So you go offense, you go defense this year.
Yeah. I mean, I think they're a step or even maybe a year ahead of the Texans, because the Texans are dismal and they don't have a quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
But could next year's Bears be this year's Lions? Yes.
Atlanta Falcons at 5-8. I think we got to see Desmond Ridder to really give us a better idea of where this Falcons team could be headed, because they're just so mediocre. I worry they're going to be that team that gets in that purgatory of we're just kind of near 500 every year.
To cut to the chase, I mean, I think all four of the NFC South teams could be playoff teams next year, because they're competing against three terrible teams, including themselves. Yeah, I mean, it's an awful situation. I mean, I've said this before, that I think the Carolina head job's pretty enticing because the state of the other three is so unthreatening. But I still think Atlanta's the worst team of the group.
I would take non-quarterback, rest of roster Panthers over Falcons, yes.
By far. And with better draft pick this year. Likely. I mean, I guess only one.
Well, it's getting pretty close, actually. Only half the game between these two teams, and the Falcons do have a bye week, and maybe we'll see Desmond Ridder after the bye week. Who knows? And that might change our idea. Maybe they have their quarterback.
Do we think the Saints are ready to fall off a cliff and not see the playoffs for the next 5 years?
I do not like where the Saints are at.
I don't either.
I would rather, I'd probably rather live in New Orleans, to be honest with you. Not to say anything about the Carolinas there, but as far as jobs go, but I like where the Panthers are at better than where the Saints are at as far as taking over a roster.
Me too. And I hate to lump these three teams together, but I think we have to, just because of the state of the South.
I don't know what the heck to think about the Arizona Cardinals.
Your quarterback's not going anywhere. Your coach might. They were a playoff team last year, and they won a bunch of games, and I'm going to go no. I just don't like the way that they're built. And what's that thing they need to be a playoff team next year that they're lacking now? I don't know that they'll get it.
Los Angeles Rams is the last team we have not talked about yet. I would assume they're going to do everything they can to be good next year. They don't have their own draft pick anyway. They're going to maneuver some stuff, hopefully get Stafford back, have, their stars and scrubs line up back, and hopefully their stars healthy and playing at a high level, and try to go right back to it like they did last year.
Yeah. And so I'm going to say, if they stay healthy, which they have had a remarkable run of health before this year, they could be in the mix again. I mean, I don't know if a Super Bowl team, they're all going to be 2 years removed from the Super Bowl at that point. But if assuming McVay is in, I bet he can convince Donald, Ramsey, Kupp, Stafford, let's give this thing one more chance. Probably without our boy Baker Mayfield, who is now.
So let's say Seattle comes back with Geno Smith next year, and you have a healthy Los Angeles Rams team.
Yeah.
I'm not going to fight you if you say the Rams should finish with a better record than the Seahawks next year.
Right. I would probably put Arizona 4th. I'd probably put San Francisco 1, but yeah. I mean, assuming the Rams roster looks like it has the last few years, which it probably will, I think they'll be in the hunt.
Who will be playing quarterback for the 49ers is a whole different discussion that we should not even start to dive into right now.
We'll get yelled at for talking too much Niners.
Exactly. So, yeah, your playoff teams next year, I think the best chance is probably the Packers and the Lions. Yeah.
I would say.
But not both. It's like one or the other in that division.
I mean, I'm going to lean towards NFC for sure. I can't see the balance of power changing that dramatically to make it that much easier to go in the NFC versus NFC next year.
And in the AFC, it's the beginning of the Steelers dynasty, of course.
Sure. Any minute now. Yeah. They're on
fire.
Right.
Fantastic question there. That took up a lot of this episode. We still got more questions to get to, though, on this Wednesday mailbag. We are looking at the Raiders situation. One more stat there on the Raiders, who are, trying to make a little bit of a push here at the end of the season, and maybe hot seat. Let's talk a little bit about the Steelers and Staley. Should he be on the hot seat with some other head coaches that to end this season and into the offseason next? BetOnline is your number one source for sports betting information, stats, news, and analysis this season. Check all the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league, not just NFL, although there is a ton of NFL odds, and they're always changing every week, getting a little bit different. You see the 49ers drop down because their quarterback gets hurt. You see teams like the Cincinnati Bengals really rise and see their odds climb. The Dallas Cowboys odds to win the Super Bowl are climbing. Every week, all the lines, of course, and tons of props, defensive player of the year, rookies of the year, and all such things you can find at BetOnline, along with NBA, college basketball, soccer, esports. You've got it all at BetOnline. And of course, if you love sports podcasts, you can find those as well at BetOnline. Get informed before you make your bets. Always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Get over to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more at BetOnline, where the game starts. Last note here on the Raiders. We talked about them a little bit, and one of our listeners here, Jason, says, any chance you guys will give the Raiders any attention? The only time you talk about them anymore is when you both incorrectly predict they will lose their next game. Well, hey, we've been more right about that than wrong, Jason. So
not lately.
Yeah, but lately they've looked better. They were the disaster of the NFL, and I don't think you would argue with that. And I'm sure you were upset watching those games many times this season. So don't pretend like this team's the one seed in the AFC or something like that. But he says, I'm assuming you'll talk about them some this week since they play Thursday night.
Yeah, maybe we have been short on them. I'm sure there's other teams that qualify. You can come yell at us. I'm Matt Williamson NFL. You know the routine. My big takeaways with the Raiders are, I thought Josh McDaniels was a quarterback or was a coordinator. I think he's proven me wrong. You know, there's some other teams, Tampa, New Orleans, where I think that is the case. I think he's a head coach and has figured things out. Namely, as we mentioned before, Josh Jacobs and Adams, feeding them the football to no end. But I really don't think it's a very talented roster. I think that was overlooked early in the year was, boy, this guy doesn't know how to coach. I mean, the Cars is not as good as he used to be. But who's the good players? I mean, I urge you all to go to drafthistory.com and look at the Mayock Gruden draft era. You know, Khalil Mack and Amari Cooper turned into dust. I mean, you know, with all, you know, the guys they traded, and it's going to take a while. So I was reluctant, you know, big picture last year, as you mentioned before, BP, that they took the win now approach. I don't think I would have taken the win now approach last offseason, but they are competitive and they're exciting. Max Crosby's a superstar. You know, I mean, they're a hard team for me to grasp the big picture.
I think it's easy to see where their holes are. And so maybe that makes it easier to fix those going into next year. And they could be the team next year that they thought they were going to be this year with Josh McDaniels have figured things out and sort of settled in as head coach, because there was talk about him getting fired a couple of weeks ago, one and done. Right. It's like, oh, he's a coordinator, not a head coach. Right. I do have an interesting note here about the difference Davante Adams makes.
It's insane.
And look, and coming into the season, I think we were correct, and we got some pushback from some listeners that didn't. You know, I love Raiders fans; they're passionate about their team. I was like, look, I can't believe in this team because I don't like their back half on defense. I don't like their defensive secondary, and I don't like their offensive line. And that has been the Achilles heel of this team the entire season. Until you get those things fixed, you're not going to be able to compete with the big dogs in the NFL. But this is a great stat from Nate Tice of The Athletic. And he says the gravity of Davante Adams. So this is the difference Davante Adams has made. And it was hard to see earlier in the season, but we've seen what Josh Jacobs has been able to do, right? Run the football there. Well, this is maybe why. No offense has faced more snaps of cover 2, cover 6 on first and second downs this season than the Raiders. So we're talking taking a player out of the box, having 2 deep safeties. 195 plays compared to the rest of the league. The league average is 122 plays this season of playing 2 deep coverage on first and second down, cover 2 and cover 6. And 195, though, for the Raiders, which is by far the most in the league. And coincidentally, the Raiders rank 4th in rush success rate and 4th in EPA per rush and 3rd in explosive run rate on those very plays. So teams, even though the Raiders have been really good at running the football on those early downs, they're still more afraid of Davante Adams, and the Raiders are taking advantage of it in the run game. So
Yeah.
that is the difference that Davante Adams has made for this football team, even if his numbers aren't quite what they have been in the recent past.
I think that's massive. I mean, I think the Adams-Jacobs combination complements, each other extremely well in that which do we want to take away? Well, the other one's going to kill us then. And, I reference another guy online is Matt Harmon. He does reception perception. I was listening to his podcast, and he's like, any of us that thought Davante Adams might not be the very best number one receiver in the world is crazy. I mean, he's still in the best player at his position conversation without a doubt. I mean, and so that's impressive. Last Raiders note I have was while you were talking there, I looked up their salary cap space for next year. They do have more than I thought. They have about their 10th in available cap space. So maybe they can enhance things outside the organization more than I thought.
Took their medicine a little bit.
Yeah.
So, Jason, I hope that answers your question. Hope that makes you feel better before I pick them to lose on tomorrow.
Yeah, I can't wait to pick for them to lose on Thursday. It'd be awesome.
I mean, I don't know. Look, Baker Mayfield in 2 days. Like, we'll get into that tomorrow. But, yeah, I might not.
He's going to play, right? That's so weird.
It looks like it.
Yeah.
I want to get to this question about the Chargers, and I've got two of them here. One is from Michael. He said, why should Brandon Staley's seat be any cooler than Hackett's? Hackett has one terrible year of offense. Staley has 2 terrible years of defense. Obviously, a defensive coach coming in. And that's a good question from Michael. Our friend Zachary, who frequently listens and tweets into the show, says, my team, the Chargers, has had so much talent in history, especially at the quarterback position, yet they've only been in 1 Super Bowl and not with any of the top 3 quarterbacks. Hopefully, Justin Herbert can finally win the Super Bowl with this team. What do you think? Can they win the Super Bowl with Justin Herbert as currently constructed?
I think a new coach is in order. I really do. I mean, Houston and Denver to me are easier fires, hotter seats, but Staley might be third. I mean, he's this offensive wizard that can't get a lot out of Herbert. I mean, and can't get the defense fixed. I mean, I'm sorry. He's not doing. They're giving him the pieces, and I know that there's injuries. And to Zach's point, I think Herbert can absolutely win a Super Bowl. Maybe not, certainly not this year, but I think he's an elite quarterback, prospect or about to be quarterback. Period. I kind of fumbled that a little bit. Yeah.
That's why Sean Payton, go for
that's the fit.
You fire the defensive coach, you bring in the offensive coach, right?
Yes.
And Sean Payton with Justin Herbert, that has to be pretty enticing to those fans. And it's a good point. There's been some really good teams and good quarterbacks in franchise history for the Chargers. They can't get over that hump. And at this point, I think you're in LA, you're fighting for eyeballs there in that market. And it hasn't been good enough for Brandon Staley. And we'll see, maybe they can make a run here. You're not firing him mid-season, but tough conversations when the season's over for sure.
Yeah. Boy,
but his team should not be as hot as Hackett's and how bad that team has been. So I'll answer that part of the question that way.
I mean, it's not as embarrassing as Denver.
Right.
Denver's embarrassing. Last nugget too, Peyton. I'm glad you mentioned Peyton, the Chargers, because they have the Saint system in place already. Lombardi's the offensive coordinator. I mean, like Herbert wouldn't have to even learn anything.
That's true. Right. Just get a better coach at running this. Right. Exactly. All right. Thanks everybody for your questions that we did not get to as well. And of course, Matt and I will be back to finish the week Thursday and Friday, making our picks for week 14 already. Is where we are. Talk to you then right here. Peacock and Williamson.